I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. Today, we're going to review the 10th album from iconic rock band, just rock. I like genres that are simple.
Yes,
just rock.
yes.
Pearl Jam, their 10th album, Lightning Bolt.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 2010, we reviewed the album, the 9th album, Backspacer, by Pearl Jam.
Yeah.
And I think that, we were kind of on the fence about that one. There's definitely some good qualities that Pearl Jam showed in their 9th album. Definitely some ones where I definitely felt like there could have been a little bit of improvement. But Tom, as far as a backstory of who this iconic rock band is, who are Pearl Jam? What have they done? Where are they now?
They put out a slew of just very seminal 90s albums, right in the first half of the 90s. When,
they were part of the grunge scene, right?
Yeah, when grunge was coming up. And I'm glad you just specified them as rock because, grunge, I love a lot of bands that are classified as grunge, but I don't really understand what that means because grunge, to me, the bands that are lumped in that category, really the only thing they have in common is like instrumental setup and maybe production style. They don't write songs very similarly at all, really.
And usually it's like lyrics can be a little bit, self-loathing.
Yeah. That's definitely it's kind of that dark.
It really was. I think more like grunge was more the contrast from that '80s hair metal that was all about partying and having a good time, doing drugs, things like that. Grunge was the antithesis of that.
So the direction that Pearl Jam took that in, which they formed, kind of an odd way because there was a group called Mother Love Bone, weird band name. Well, that's what you get in 90s rock, really, The vocalist passed away. Chris Cornell kind of started working with the guys from the band that ended up forming Pearl Jam after they created an album under the moniker Temple of the Dog, which had Eddie Vedder on it as well. It's kind of an interesting mix-up story. I definitely recommend checking out the history of that. But basically, Eddie Vedder continued working with these guys. They made their debut album, 10, which was a monstrous debut.
I grew up with that album.
Yeah,
I can still remember my dad just blasting that in the car.
It had so many singles from it. It just dominated the radio, still does. I don't think you could listen to a rock station and not hear a song from that album today. And they kept just dominating throughout the 90s. Albums like Versus, No Code, Vitalogy had a lot of success. I would say they tapered off a little bit in the late 90s. They're still around putting out albums, but they had some lineup changes. And now they're kicking it back a little bit more into full gear, with these last few records, I would say, as far as just the frequency of their output and stuff. Now, one thing that I've always thought sets Pearl Jam apart sound-wise and stylistically from a lot of those other rock bands of the 90s is they seem to incorporate a much more classic rock guitar sound.
Absolutely. Especially when they solo. I noticed that there's a lot of like squiggly doobly solos, it comes from bands like Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin.
AC/DC.
Right, absolutely. And on this album, though, what I like about this album is that I hear them playing with their sound a bit. There's definitely a bit of thrash and punk on this album, especially track 2, one of the singles on the album, Mind Your Manners. I really felt like that just had this just thrash punk energy to it, which is, I mean, it's not like the band hasn't dabbled in that before, but to hear it so prevalent on this album was kind of a new way to look at the band for me.
Yeah, and that was definitely one of those tracks that's very much a throwback. I think that if I had to compare this album to any one of their albums, I would say it sounds more like the mid-90s kind of no-code era.
Yeah.
Where it's not super heavy and guitar-focused, there's some of that, but they're more just playing around with a little bit more down dynamic sounds.
Right.
Especially on the back half of this album, you get more of that with the last few tracks, Sleeping by Myself, Yellow Moon, and Future Days. You also get that in like Sirens, track 4, good kind of power ballad type of vibe. Right. But Eddie Vedder's still emoting a lot, and that's something that's always been there in their music too, is Eddie Vedder's just kind of emotive growl.
This album, though, it kicks your ass from the moment you put it on. Getaway is just a very loud, rocking song. Then Mind Your Manners, and the whole front half of the album I felt like was very rocking.
Yeah.
Where the back half goes into a bit more of that, morose sort of ballady vibe. They're definitely exploring moods and different genres, more so on the back half of the album.
Yeah. One thing also, though, while you're right, it does kick your ass right from the beginning, especially in those first 3 tracks. That stretch is very rocking. But one thing that I feel like doesn't quite have the impact that some of their other work does is, and this is getting real picky, but I want to say the mixing. I don't feel like the guitars were actually mixed very loudly.
They're not as loud as they could.
No, they're not as like in your face like the playing is, but the actual sound of it and the way that it works with all the other elements that are happening, it doesn't quite have that punch.
Not until you get to the solo, and then the solo is just all over the place.
Right in the middle channel, just kind of,
Yeah, I totally agree. And really what I saw, like, specifically with track 1, Getaway, I mean, it really was just this energetic, upbeat song, but it kind of sounded like what a bridge would for, like, a normal, like, I think of, like, Freebird by Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Yeah.
You know, you have that, you know, huge bridge that they're doing there, with, like, the huge solo and everything, and it kind of sounds like a part of just this gigantic solo that they're playing, and it's just this huge, upbeat, rocking part, and it's all that there is, and it's 3.5 minutes. And so I did feel like there was times in this album where this band is trying to do cool things with their songwriting. It was really, for me, it was a little bit more hit or miss whether it worked or not.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I really want to say about Lightning Bolt is that Eddie Vedder, I feel like, did a much better job than on previous efforts of presenting his vocals in an appealing manner. I didn't feel like his voice sounded old, soaked in wine, or, you know, just croaky at all. I felt like his vocals are, like, top-notch throughout this album. He does a really good job of presenting intensity, good tone, and even a lot of emotion in a lot of the vocals.
I agree, and even compared to their last 2 albums, Self-Titled and Backspacer, I thought that he did a better vocal job, which is funny because he's getting older, and, you know, he's not getting younger. He's not an old dude, but he ain't getting younger, let's face it. And yet somehow
just blew my mind.
He's it's math, man. You can't argue with it. But he certainly is still doing a better job than I think he was even in years past.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's really cool to hear. At the same time, though, I don't think this is the highlight of their songwriting. They've done better in that regard. I think that they still have that kind of edge in their performance, but it's not quite there in the production or the songwriting.
I actually prefer the Pearl Jam tracks that are a bit more out there, a bit more experimental in nature, like track 6, Infallible, or track 7, Pendulum, where it's a little bit darker, more moody. I feel like it's just, I think there's part of this band that if you're going to really get into their sound and absolutely fall in love with it, and anybody that I know who's ever been super into this band, my father, a friend I had, you know, in a previous job, you know, just that have loved Pearl Jam, they've all really been into Eddie Vedder's vocals. Been able to emotionally connect to Eddie Vedder's vocals and what he's doing. And quite honestly, it's just never been there for me. You know, I'm just not able. It's kind of like when you when you talk about in the Radiohead album In Rainbows, like I'm able to connect with Tom York's vocal presence, and I can't do that here quite as well. On the tracks where they're experimenting, where they're going a bit more moody, where Eddie Vedder isn't belting it out, and he's really just trying and emoting and singing, and you know, it's more of a singer-songwriter setup. I think it works. I think it really sells it a lot more. It provides a little bit more of the warmth that I'm looking for. I will criticize this album. I felt like it jumped around genres just a bit too much to really be one themed experience. But then again, that also adds to the variety. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I wish they could have tied the bow around it a little bit better. But still, you know, I was pleasantly surprised. I like this more than I thought I would.
Yeah, same here.
What would you give this?
76.
I'm going to go right there with you. 76.
All right. That's what it is.
This is a solid album, and a solid album that doesn't blow us away. Is definitely a mid to upper 70s album. That's right where Lightning Bolt is. And as far as a 10th album from a very established band who clearly isn't backing down, these guys aren't going anywhere, and you have to respect the hell out of that. I mean, Pearl Jam is a cool band, still doing cool stuff, you know, several decades into their career. You guys should go out and listen to Lightning Bolt and let us know your thoughts at www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what albums you'd like us to see us review on this channel. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.